I'm tearing your heart out, thinking of me, living so thoughtlessly, doing you wrong, doing you wrong, doing you wrong, doing you wrong. My life out of balance, survival my call, never questioning what I'm turning into, fitting in this culture, my constant goal, all the lives I undo, doing you wrong, doing you wrong, doing you wrong, doing you wrong. You're slipping away now, out of my grasp. I've no idea how or what I've done. I can't live without you, baby. Hubris aside, I can't breathe without you, honey. There's nowhere to hide, and soon I'll find I can't run, doing you wrong, doing you wrong, doing you wrong, doing you wrong. You're slipping away now, out of my grasp. I've no idea how or what I've done. I can't live without you, baby. Hubris aside, I can't breathe without you, honey. There's nowhere to hide, and soon I'll find I can't run.
Good afternoon, everybody from Central Florida. Thanks for joining us on today's live stream. Today, I ask you to watch one video, a short video, and read 4 articles in anticipation. And one of those articles from Scientific American has a video clip in it that I'm going to play and sort of walk through with you. First, though, thank you for joining me, for joining us, everybody, and special thanks to those who have joined the Nature Bats Last YouTube channel recently, since we did our last one of these Ask an Ecologist at Anything live streams 15 days ago. So, in chronological order, those people include Peter Miller, my good friend and colleague, thank you. Redreamer, Redreaming. I bet that's not his or her given name. Rose Petal, same goes. Gerard Pollock. No, and I forgot to say, I apologize in advance for any mispronunciations, especially for the names. And I'm thinking specifically of this one, Daniel Laframboise, which if we were in Boise, Idaho, we would pronounce La Framboise, as in I'm from Boise, or something like that. Thanks to Climate Deception Network, Chris Kelly, Mark Trawick, JL moments ago, and Pete Soderman also moments ago. So thanks everybody for paying to follow our work at the Nature Bats Last YouTube channel.
Still have this audio. It's echoing through. They're hearing that.
Okay. Apparently we just fixed an echo. I didn't do a thing. I was just sitting here minding my own business. Alrighty then. Anyway, thank you everybody for joining us. And I would like to now pick through, maybe nitpick through, the video included in the Scientific American article. The video is called World Scientists' Warning of a Climate Emergency.
Wait 5 seconds and start it over, please.
I have been asked to wait 5 seconds and start it over, so that's what I'm going to do. We might still have a little echo problem here with the sound playing off my laptop into these microphones. All right, trying again. World Scientists Warning of a Climate Emergency.
Turn that volume up.
They wrote that the climate crisis is accelerating faster than most scientists expected.
The report draws on 40 years of data. Ang klimatycznym kryzysie. Tumingin dito from Oregon State University, one of the lead authors of this study, ecology professor William Ripple.
As a solution, Ripple and Wolf have proposed 6 different policy goals that could help fix the issue.
Follow me.
It just started with a thought in my head and a feeling about how scary climate change is, and I need to do just one thing, and that's the thing I decided to do. Hey, my name is Bill Ripple, and I'm a scientist in this climate emergency.
Did you hear all those people cheer because he announced he was a scientist? That's never happened for me. I must be working in the wrong format.
We lay out 6 steps, which are solutions to the impacts of climate change. Well, today we have with us Dr. Michael Mann. Welcome, Dr. Mann.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
I have some questions for you today. What about the role of government and the fossil fuel industry in changing course? What do you think?
We do need to see energy companies shift away from fossil fuels towards green energy, renewable energy. But they won't do that without government incentives.
One of the reasons they won't do that is because there's no such thing as green energy. We've known for years that civilization is a heat engine no matter how it's powered. We've also known that there are adverse environmental consequences associated with the materials that go into so-called green energy. A solar panel doesn't appear on the Earth courtesy of the solar panel fairy. Same for wind turbines. These things are environmentally expensive.
You have something playing.
One of the reasons they won't do that is because there's no
They're
such thing
playing
as
the stream.
green energy.
You have to turn
We've
that
known
off.
for years that civilization is a
Where
heat
is
engine
it?
no matter how
Where
it's
is it?
powered. We've also known that there are adverse environmental consequences associated with the materials that go into so-called green energy. A solar panel doesn't appear.
Here you go.
All right.
And now you can
There are all
hear
kinds
that.
that we can do in our everyday lives to try to decrease
reduce our own individual carbon footprint, but unless we have economic incentives,
Yes, there are things we can do in our own lives to reduce our carbon footprint, and I've done essentially all of those things while living off-grid for 10 years. I wonder how many of those Michael Mann has pursued in his personal life. I'd be willing to bet that it's nearly zero. He surely knows what I know because he's been involved in email threads with me. And so he knows about aerosol masking. He never says the words. He knows of the consequences of abruptly reducing coal consumption, but he doesn't talk about those things. What he's asking for is for you to make sacrifices, for you to stop using fossil fuels. We have known since William Stanley Jevons's book, The Coal Question, which came out in 1865. We've known about Jevons paradox, which indicates that two things. What you don't use of a finite material, somebody else will. And typically, the somebody else is a person who is more knowledgeable and frequently more wealthy than you and me. That's one. The other side of the Jevons paradox, the other conclusion, is that as we become more efficient at using any particular material, say coal, which was his example, we actually become more efficient at using it. We don't use less. We become more efficient and therefore burn more. And the most recent large-scale example of this came in the 2008-2009 global financial crisis. In the wake of the crisis, automobile companies made engines that took advantage of more power. They actually burn more powerfully. They didn't reduce gasoline consumption or fossil fuel consumption at all. They just made cars that were more powerful than they had been before. Well, that's inconvenient.
for renewable energy or a price on carbon,
and the price on carbon that he's talking about here, we have known for years that is not an effective solution. And he surely knows as well. There's a reason he's called the Lion Man in some circles.
or creating infrastructure. We won't see the large-scale shift in behavior that we need away from fossil fuels towards renewable energies. In the current public conversation about climate change, we're hearing a lot about those things now, which is encouraging. We're starting to really see some progress.
We really are at the stage where we have to do everything we can to avoid terrible consequences. And so I think most people are aware that carbon dioxide is critical to bring down emissions of that, but the short-lived pollutants are also critical. We need to act on carbon dioxide in the near term anyway, or it will get out of control in the long term. But one of the...
Wait, it hasn't gotten out of control already? The more than 60 self-reinforcing feedback loops indicating that nature's in charge now, not humans. That doesn't mean anything to this individual. I pointed out via blog post a few critical errors conducted by Schindel and Smith. This is Drew Schindel that's talking on the screen. And his colleague Smith and he had a paper published in September 19 issue of Nature. And there were some significant issues associated with that paper. Most notably, I'm going to quote from it here, methane led to cooling in the scenarios examined here. So in their scenarios, increased methane led to cooling of the planet. And they said that occurred because the 2C reference scenario used in the study already incorporated all the methane reductions included in the 1.5 degree scenarios. So that makes no sense whatsoever. It's not as if we have suddenly ceased putting methane into the atmosphere. Nobody's talking about that. In fact, it keeps going up exponentially over the last few years. And just because we account for some amount at one level of warning doesn't mean the rest just goes away. It's continuing to be released exponentially and therefore appear in the atmosphere exponentially. So this is a classic example of confusing the general populace with information that is not quite factual.
Great things about dealing with short-lived climate pollutants and bringing those down is you get the benefits very quickly because they don't last that long in the atmosphere.
Right, according to James Hansen in several video clips, one or two of which I've posted recently, it's 5 days. It's 5 days for those aerosols in the atmosphere to fall out of the atmosphere. And so that leads to very abrupt warming. And it doesn't take all of those aerosols falling out of the atmosphere before we have a profound increase in global average temperature.
And I think we have a little bit of a growing realization that it's important amongst non-governmental organizations and different governments around the world that we do need to target these other pollutants, partially because we've waited so long to deal with CO2 that, consequences are already here and now, and it's, as you've...
Consequences are here and now. Yes, they are. That's an interesting admission, upon which he doesn't follow up, and neither does Ripple.
When we put it, it's a climate emergency.
Restoring and protecting natural ecosystems might not seem very intuitive to mitigate climate change.
But in fact, it is intuitive to, I suspect, most people watching. It's certainly intuitive to any conservation biologist, any biologist in general who studies ecosystems. So Ripple is in a good position to host this video to ask these questions because he's an ecologist. He actually understands the relationship between the natural world and human consequences and actions and how they interplay.
It comes down to the basics of photosynthesis. If you want to protect peatland or protect a mangrove in Bangladesh or India, they would continue to absorb the carbon dioxide that is released through anthropogenic processes, such as use of fossil fuels. So it's very important to not just conserve, but also restore and improve management of all our natural ecosystems. We estimated that natural climate solutions could provide 1/3 of the mitigation needed by the year 2030 to keep global rise in temperatures to 2 degrees centigrade.
Now that sounds great, and 1/3 is nothing to be scoffed at by any stretch of the imagination. But most of this mitigation comes by planting trees. And as I pointed out in a peer-reviewed paper published June 12th, 2020, the title of which reads, "Trees Cannot Sequester Enough Carbon to Slow Abrupt Climate Change." So I was pointing out here that there are untoward consequences associated with planting trees. For one, albedo. Depending upon where you plant the trees, they're going to darken the surface of the planet and therefore reduce albedo or reflectance from the planet. So it's not all good news, and claiming that we've made a dent in the problem come 2030 might just be a little too late.
Getting 1/3 of the way, I think, is huge. So nature can really work for us here. Thanks.
Again, a misunderstanding or at least a miscommunication about the importance of abrupt climate change. 2030 is a long time from now.
Hello, Genesis. Good to see you.
Hi, good to see you too.
We published the World Scientist Warning of a Climate Emergency, and we asked that people eat lower on the food chain. How can changing our diets help the planet in the climate crisis?
Yeah, so animal agriculture isn't sustainable to the planet. It's the meat and dairy industry. That's one of the main causes of climate change. Now, there's so many studies that are saying that if half of the world was vegan, we'd be able to restore native forests and reverse climate change. So it's really an important question.
Reverse climate change? I don't think so. I've seen no evidence to support that idea. even if half the planet does go vegan. Oh, and by the way, half the planet is not going to go vegan. A third of the planet is not going to go vegan. A quarter of the planet is not going to go vegan. People don't have that awareness, understanding, ability to make a small sacrifice. And I'm unconvinced it's a sacrifice that would be beneficial anyway, as I pointed out at GuyMcPherson.com repeatedly.
Where your food comes from. I started Youth Climate Save, which is a movement that focuses on how animal agriculture is harming the planet. A bunch of youth are starting to become activists because they're realizing of how important our voices are and how powerful our voices are to reverse climate change.
Reverse? Even the incredibly conservative Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change admits that climate change is irreversible. That was in a September 2018 or September 19 report on the oceans that you can find at GuyMcPherson.com. Climate change is irreversible. I don't care if you plant 1,000 trees a day yourself personally. Climate change is still irreversible, and I don't see any way around that, unfortunately.
It's the economic system we bought into that is driving the destructiveness we're realizing today. Now, economists believe that they have invented a system that can grow forever. So consumption is a fundamental part of the economic system that we now live in. 70% of the American economy is based on consumption.
And David Suzuki ought to know. Here's a man with 5 children, 5 first world wealthy children, and 5 mansions scattered all over the world. The carbon footprint for him to travel just to his mansions probably exceeds the carbon footprint for a year, for a lifetime, for many people living in, quote, third world countries. So if anybody knows about consumption, trust me, it's David Suzuki.
Now, anybody knows that endless growth is the creed of cancer cells. Nothing can grow endlessly forever, but we have elevated the economy above the atmosphere that gives us air to breathe, that gives us weather, climate, and the seasons. Trees are taking carbon out of the air and putting oxygen back in it. Not a bad service, but there's no sense that whatever we do to nature, who gives us life, that we have a responsibility to care for it. That ain't in our economic system.
We have a responsibility. Maybe that applies to you too, David Suzuki. Maybe you should take responsibility. Maybe you should get rid of some of your mansions. It's a little late to get rid of your children, I know, although you might have raised them differently so that they didn't turn out to be the uber consumers of the planet like you are. Maybe you could sell a mansion or two. Maybe you could give the proceeds to, I don't know, Dr. Yato's Mears project at Harvard. Maybe then you would be demonstrating some commitment to a project that might actually do something to slow loss of human habitat here on Earth.
The human population will reach 8 billion people in 2023.
I'm not completely convinced of that, but maybe.
To put that number a little in perspective, in 1800, the number of people was 1 billion. And the global middle class has the greatest aggregate impact on the planet in terms.
Here we go, shaming the global middle class, which is going away very rapidly, into doing something that the billionaires are unwilling to do. Ever come across a billionaire or even a millionaire who was interested in preserving habitat on Earth? I haven't. I haven't even found somebody who's willing to have the conversation. Let's blame the middle class.
Ecological drawdown, and in terms of pollution, garbage and greenhouse gases. And so it becomes very evident that lowering our numbers is a really important way to lower the impact on the Earth system.
Oh, and by the way, lowering those numbers necessarily means reduced industrial activity. And we know that reduced industrial activity projected between now and 2100 in most papers is sufficient to cause abrupt overheating of the planet and therefore destroy habitat for humans and essentially all other life on Earth. Not surprisingly, there's no recognition of the aerosol masking effect, aka global dimming here, because that would change the message that we've been touting for the last, how long? Nearly 60 years? Yeah, we can't have that.
Ever women are empowered economically, socially, legally, and when girls and young women are supported to go to school, at least through secondary education, what happens is that the number of children women choose to have drops. That gives me hope because I feel that in our deepest heart, we are in love with this planet, and when we understand what's going on, there will be a shift.
Well, thank you, Eileen.
Hope is great, isn't it? In any event, I was teaching that information in my classes 30 years ago. The idea that girls and women, when better educated, have a fewer number of people and wait longer to have more people on the planet is absolutely supported by abundant evidence. And had we been focusing our educational efforts on girls and women for the last 100 years, I suspect it would be we'd be in a very different situation right now than the one we're currently in.
It's very inspiring to me.
Ripple says he hopes their paper raises awareness about how dangerous climate change is and encourages people to make a change.
It's going to be up to humanity to decide what to do next.
They say there's now a moral obligation on scientists to speak up.
We are at
There's always been a moral obligation on scientists to speak up. A majority of scientists have not spoken, not about this issue, because they would lose privilege. I know something about this. There is always a moral obligation for scientists to present the evidence as they know it, and yet almost none do. Why do you think that is? Probably has something to do with privilege.
a social tipping point that I think we're going to see the policies start to change more rapidly now.
We'd better start to see those changes happening more rapidly now.
Makers need us scientists to take a stand. So one of my goals in publishing this paper is to set an example to other scientists to write simple papers, suggest solutions, and to speak out.
Speaking out worked great for me, by the way. Why don't you join me, Bill? Alrighty, there you have it. Thank you, everybody, for tolerating my long-windedness through that video. And let's see if I can get your questions and comments back on screen with me here. All right. Somebody is asking about the ability to donate to the Mirrors project, and I think the easy way to go about that would be to send an email message to Dr. Ye Tao. That's Tao, T-A-O, at roland.harvard.edu. Dr. Tao is at the Roland Institute. Roland is spelled Rowland. So that's Tao at roland.harvard.edu. And I'm pretty sure if you're interested in providing support for the Mirrors Project, Dr. Tao will be able to point the way and get you started. And I'm sure he would appreciate it as well. Thank you very much, Joanne Vanek. Welcome to Nights of NTHE as a member on the Nature Bats Last YouTube channel. I'm going to scroll through the previous comments and questions. Let's see, Guy, Guy, you seem to be more pissed off today than usual. Try deep meditation. When I was involved in an email back and forth today in which somebody was telling me what to do. Gee. And I pointed out to this person that it happens every day. So thanks for being the latest. Think about, try deep meditation. You have no idea what goes on in my daily life. Zero. You don't know how frequently I meditate, but you're telling me I need deep meditation. You don't know what I eat, you don't know what I drink, but I bet you'd be willing to tell me that I'm wrong about both of those things, like almost everybody else is. Kind of serious question from no representation. The mansion would still be there even if he sold it. I think you mean why not destroy it and let the local plants, aka weeds, take over that land? Well, there's a variety of approaches that can be used with David Suzuki's mansions. I was thinking perhaps he could sell one for a few $1 million. That money could go to Dr. Tao's Mirrors Reflection Project, and maybe we could reverse what I believe is irreversible climate change, or at least slow the rapid increase of planetary temperature that's currently going on. I think that would be a better short-term use of the funds than, say, blowing up the mansion or leaving it to the weeds. But I'm not really in charge of that project, so I just think David Suzuki is a classic example of telling other people what to do while he basks in his enormous privilege. Diana says, it appears to me there is much more water in the clouds now than in past years or decades. The clouds seem fuller, have new names, etc. I'm in the Pacific Northwest, so it's usually cloudy. But yes, as climate scientists have been saying since at least the 1970s, a warmer planet is a wetter planet. As the planet warms, more water is evaporated, and that evaporated water goes somewhere. It goes into those clouds. And so that means more rain in the not too distant future, because perhaps you've heard this expression, what goes up must come. Yeah, same kind of thing. So a warmer planet is a wetter planet, and you're seeing it in the storms in the Pacific Northwest. Yes, Jimmy John, I have read the recent James Hansen paper regarding how the loss of aerosols since 2016 has accelerated global warming. What else? What else you got, everybody? Come on. You can ask an ecologist anything. I'll even answer some of your questions. Thank you, Jeremy. All is well. We had a good and safe holiday. I don't think we left the house. Maybe to go to the post office. So we were safely ensconced in this rental home, which is nice. It's a little cold today. It's only going to get up into the high 60s, so it feels like I should be wearing a couple of sweaters in the house where it's only about 70. It's amazing how quickly we adapt as individuals. Oh, Don, that's a fine question, and I don't remember. Which geological period, epoch, goes with 415 parts per million of CO2, but I know who knows. I know. He knows all that lurks in the evil hearts of men. The Google knows. Osama, the latest information I've seen about flipping into an El Nino is not this year, surprisingly. For about 10 years there, it seems like we were going back and forth much more rapidly than we had in the past. Instead, everything I've seen indicates that we're headed for an El Nino in approximately 2023, plus or minus 10 minutes. So I'd be surprised. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we make it that long. I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't either. And I think most people watching and listening understand that during an El Nino Southern Oscillation, the ocean releases a bunch of carbon dioxide and also releases a bunch of heat. That's one of the consequences of the ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation, is the release of abundant heat. And so you spill that heat onto the land, and that's what was so surprising about 2020 being tied for or the hottest year on record. 2020, according to Hansen and Sato, was going to be the hottest year on record when they wrote their paper toward the end of December 2020. And other people said it would be tied with 2016. All the previous year hottest temperatures have been during El Nino Southern Oscillations. There was a El Nino for the entirety of 2020, and still it was very warm. So, Jimmy, I presume you looked it up. Chances of ENSO neutral conditions next year is 20%. La Nina, 80%, which is good news for those of us who appreciate the ability to have habitat for a little while longer for humans on Earth. And El Nino is around 0%. So that's all good. Amy asks, what are some signs that trees are affected by ecological demise? How can we tell if plants near us are in distress? Are leaves that do not fall off before winter a sign? Yes, potentially. And something that most people would miss is the timing of leaf out, the phenology of leaf out in the spring. So if you have any idea or of when that might be based on your own personal memory or records, or if you have a National Phenology Network office near you, you can contact them and see when the average first leaf out is for a variety of species, trees and other plants as well. And that leaf out in the spring is especially important because it's dependent upon events that happened the previous fall. So you might not notice things in the fall and winter because biological activity is relatively muted compared to spring and summer. But what happens in the spring is a direct result of what happened in the previous fall, and obviously summer as well. So falling leaves is a sign, and there are others as well. please clarify global dimming as plus or minus. If we're interested in habitat for humans, I'd say it's a huge plus. And it's also, as James Hansen calls it, a Faustian bargain. So we burn a bunch of fossil fuels. That obviously leads to greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which warm the planet. Maximum warming associated with carbon dioxide occurs in about 10 years after emission. And the heat associated with the current level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is locked in for at least the next 1,000 years, both of those based on peer-reviewed literature. And so the aerosols that are produced as a result of burning fossil fuels, most notably coal, and especially, quote, unclean coal or conventional coal, they help to keep the planet cool. They're constantly falling out of the atmosphere. We're constantly adding them back up into the atmosphere. They fall out very quickly, and when they fall out, they allow for very rapid heating of the planet. So if that occurs when plants are relatively biologically inactive, such as very late autumn, and here I'm thinking late autumn in the northern hemisphere because that's where a vast majority of the plants and the people are. So late autumn through very early spring, that's when you want that to happen. That's when you want industrial activity to be reduced, and that's when we saw it as a result of the coronavirus this last year. So I think we really got lucky. Had the virus originally broke out and had its consequences 3 months later, I suspect we would have been out of habitat for humans by now because of the undesirable impacts on everything from crop production to survival of trees. So global dimming is good for us in the short term, bad for us because it's pollutants in the long term, and we don't have a long term. I don't know how the U.S. 2020 crop yield turned out. I don't know how any place did in the Northern Hemisphere. Perhaps somebody could track that down. It used to be very widely available. Delana, hi Doc, riddle me this. If I move to Seattle area, how long before you think the increasing rains/mudslides will cover the area? It's already sea level, right? Interestingly, I had a friend move to Seattle from Los Angeles metropolitan area a few years ago. She was the first climate change refugee I knew about, and she moved not because of sea level, but instead because of a much cooler and moister environment than she was experiencing in the Los Angeles area. Well, since then, of course, Los Angeles, the vegetation around much of Los Angeles has burned, and it's been record-breaking hot in the Los Angeles area many times since she left a few years ago. So that sounds like she made a good choice. Sea level is, unless it happens much differently than it has in the recent past, sea level rise is going to be responsible for the death of very few people on Earth, and certainly not in the Seattle metropolitan area, because nobody lives on the beach. There are laws and regulations about how close to the ocean you can live. There will be mudslides. There will be floods. There will be all kinds of terrible things happen as a result of a wetter planet. But there will rarely be loss of habitat as a result of a wetter planet once you get away from the tropics and subtropical areas. As I pointed out repeatedly, based on the peer-reviewed literature, I'm not going to be able to find the paper right now, and I can't remember who the authors are. It was in Science Advances, published last year, and indicated that we are already exceeding wet bulb temperatures for people in tropical and subtropical areas around the planet. So we're already losing habitat, in other words. Oh, here we go. Sorry. Jan with the unpronounceable first and last names. Roger Hallam said that the eventual extinction will happen gradually. We will reach a point where 25% of the population will die off every year. Do you agree with him? No. Roger Hallam has lied so many times I can't even keep track. I've told him repeatedly about the aerosol masking effect. He continues to claim it doesn't exist, lying by omission, or downplaying its importance. I conclude it's really important based on peer-reviewed literature. He concludes it's not important based on his opinion. And also his life of activism. If activism is going to change anything, he thinks the good way for it to change is to stop people from burning fossil fuels. First of all, Jevons paradox says that ain't going to happen, that instead the same amount of fossil fuels will be burned. This will be burned by different people. Maybe Hallam works for one of those people. And we will reach a point where 25% of the population will die off every year. The first time that happens, we lose habitat for all the rest of the people on the planet because of aerosol masking, which, again, Hallam is apparently reluctant to talk about. Pat the Batman fan, loved the name, by the way. My big question, which will collapse first, the economy or the environment? Certainly one of them. At this point, they seem to be going hand in hand. If you live in those tropical or subtropical areas that are already experiencing lethal wet bulb temperatures, it's happening right now, both of them. Louis, I learned about climate change living in Ecuador. Farmers referred to El Nino as El Fenomeno, afraid to be cursed. That's hilarious. Recently noticed that various observatories around the Arctic/Greenland are observing above average nitrous oxide concentrations. Is this due to melting permafrost? Almost certainly it's due to melting permafrost. I don't know what else would account for that. Thank you, Greg Alter, for becoming a member of the Nature Bats Last YouTube channel. Scott, that's a great question. Could it be that El Nino, La Nina cycles are being affected by abrupt climate change? Yes, absolutely. And I thought that's what was going on when we were having El Nino southern oscillations every few years on what used to be a 7 to 9 year cycle. So the El Nino would show up every 7 to 9 years, and then ending maybe 2 years ago, there was a period of about 10 years in length when there was an El Nino southern oscillation every 2 or 3 years. So I thought that was a consequence of abrupt climate change. But if that were the case, we'd be due to have one now or next year. And most people don't see that coming now or next year. So I don't know what's going on. Also, there's a paper I quoted in my paper on loss of habitat, my peer-reviewed paper for loss of habitat, and it had predicted something like 5 or 7 years in advance that we would be in an El Nino right now. or no, sorry, for late last year. It would start late in 2020. And that was based on a new technique for predicting El Nino Southern Oscillation events, and apparently it was wrong because we're not in an El Nino Southern Oscillation right now. Sam Crana seems to believe the strongest feedback loop is increased water vapor. Can you explain how this manifests? Yes. And it's certainly among the fastest. I don't know how we evaluate which is most important. But as the planet heats, as I said previously, a warmer planet is a wetter planet. As the planet heats, more water is evaporated off the planet, goes into the atmosphere. And that transpires over a period of a few days. Not a few months, not a few years, a few days. So there's this equilibrium being sought. I'm anthropomorphizing Earth at this point. There's this equilibration between water on Earth and water in the atmosphere. And the warmer the planet becomes, the more evaporation occurs, and water vapor acts as a greenhouse gas. And obviously, if it takes only a few days to evaporate a little bit more water into the atmosphere, and that atmosphere now has an increased global gas concentration, which allows for increased precipitation to be evaporated again. So there's a very rapid equilibrium in process. It's constantly going on. So I can understand why Sam Crana would believe that the strongest feedback loop, or at least the fastest feedback loop, is water vapor. Strongest, I'm not sure how we evaluate that. Methane is at least 150 times more powerful a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is. I haven't seen numbers on water vapor and how strong, how powerful it is relative to carbon dioxide and methane, for example. That's great. Brent points out that an ancestor noted in the 1860s in Pineville, Oregon, that the frost line was rising each year. So presumably as you go up the mountain in, say, 1860, the frost line was here, and in 1865, the frost line was up there, in 1870, the frost line, so the frost line keeps creeping up the hill, presumably in response to climate change. And that makes perfect sense. The Industrial Revolution had been going since at least 1750. That's the baseline most people use, unless they're lying. And probably industry broadly defined certainly started before 1750. So pegging 1750 as the beginning of the Industrial Revolution is probably pretty conservative. Let's say industrial activity began in the 1400s or 1500s, then of course the impacts would be felt by the frost line, so it would be going up the hill by the 1860s. That's more than 100 years into the Industrial Revolution, even if we peg it at 1750. Do I believe a massive methane burp is necessary for your 2020 prediction? No, absolutely not. I think it's sufficient but not necessary to trigger an abrupt rise in global average temperature. And that's what I pointed out in my peer-reviewed article, my latest peer-reviewed article, which I have around here somewhere, and appears in about the middle of each blog post. So if you scroll down past the point of whatever the blog post is, you'll see my recent peer-reviewed articles, and it's the one that deals with habitat for humans. And I point out 7 different means by which we could lose habitat in the near future. That's only one. not really been a serious winter in the Pacific Northwest this year. Not below freezing overnight for most of the coast. Seems to be a very ominous signal. The rhododendrons appear to be sprouting now. Do you think these are spring rains? Probably. I don't know where you are, but it could be that spring has sprung, depending on what part of the world you're in. What possible pandemic can hit full strength during the summertime, Guy, enabling the loss of global dimming? Well, the current one could. I don't know if we're through the third wave or into the third wave. We only know in retrospect when the number of cases and deaths declined. So it could be, because we didn't pay proper attention to COVID-19, that we will see more spread in the near future. But I don't know. I don't know anybody that wants that to happen. Why do I think the media is obsessed with sea level rise as the big deal about climate change? There has long been a well-documented relationship between the media and the government. In the United States, the documentation is probably best known, but it's all over the world. There is almost nothing less important with respect to climate change than sea level rise. If you're interested in habitat for human animals, sea level rise is like the least of your concerns. That's why I think it makes the news. The goal of the corporate media is distract, divide. Two goals: distract and divide. And it's working brilliantly. Yes, island nations are now disappearing as a result of sea level rise. And when I say, perhaps I should back up just a little bit. When I say that sea level rise will not be a tremendously important factor, I'm talking about relative to nearly 8 billion people on Earth. Obviously, if you're one of those people who had to leave as a result of sea level rise, then it has an obvious impact on you right now. It's in the rear view mirror. You moved on. Pauline, I don't recall. Sorry. Yeah, Don points out that sea level is James Hansen's hot button issue. Never mind extinction of species, save the condos. And there's a perfectly valid reason for that. James Hansen has the degrees that most climate scientists have: physics and astronomy, if I recall correctly. So the degrees held by most climate scientists are physics, planetary science, and what did I just say? Hansen has a degree in astronomy, occasionally mathematics. Almost nobody currently actively conducting primary research on climate change has a degree in biology. Those people are few and far between. I can think of two, Strona and Bradshaw. Remember their paper from, October 2018, November 2018, indicating in scientific reports, indicating that a 5 to 6 degree global average temperature rise will cause extinction of all life on Earth through a process they call co-extinctions. They're biologists. They understand the intricate web between different organisms. Physicists will never get that. Planetary scientists, no clue whatsoever. Yes or no, Brent asks, is our weather being manipulated by the Chinese? I don't even know what you mean. At what level? How? By what means? I don't think so. But if you're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, then yeah, sort of. If you're talking about reduction in aerosol masking, yeah, sort of. I don't know what you mean there. That's a great analog, Peter Miller. Could we compare abrupt climate change and environmental collapse to my broken furnace? One day it just stopped working and I wasn't expecting it. It always just worked and then it didn't. Yeah, I think that's a reasonable analogy. We grew up at the most amazing time in human history when there was a relatively cool planet which allowed for the growing of grains and therefore the ability, as Daniel Quinn has said and written many times, to lock up the food. That set of living arrangements allowed us to lock up the food, the ability to grow, store, and distribute grains at scale allowed us, almost required us, to go into human population overshoot at the level of the globe. But along the way, what a party. We had the ability to store food for extended periods of time. Suddenly, there wasn't a plague for a long time. And suddenly, there was a plague after having not been one for a long time. Yeah. Oh, will aerosol masking be discouraged after COVID is brought under control? I think that, again, we have been quite fortunate with respect to regional and local aerosol masking. The places that the virus had its consequences were spotty and at different times and places around the globe. First Wuhan, then India, then Eurasia, and finally in the northeastern United States. But all that played out over a span of several months. It didn't happen all at one time. So I think the question is, will aerosol masking be diminished after COVID is brought under control? And I think it will be. I think that the aerosol masking, the masking by the aerosols will increase in the wake of COVID-19, as long as we don't have other viruses or other threats to industrial activity that appear at that time. So in general, I think that's probably the way we're headed. Yes, Amy, the National Phenology Network website is very good. It was created by one of my former graduate students. He moved on after being the inaugural director of the National Phenology Network. And another one of my graduate students is now the director of the National Phenology Network. So first it was Jake Weltzine, now it's Teresa Crimmins. And they both have done amazing work. And I attribute that in part to them having an understanding of ecology and biology and the interactions between organisms and their environments. Do I see a good future in indoor agriculture? Investing in companies that build greenhouses? No and no. And the reason for that is, again, once I became aware of the full effect of the aerosol masking effect, I realized that there's no way out. That once we lose a significant portion of that aerosol masking, then we lose habitat for humans. I don't want to live in a greenhouse. I don't want to live in a bunker. I don't want to live in a cargo container. I barely want to live in a house. So I'm not investing in anything, and not just because I don't have any money, but also because I don't think that's a good investment. I'm living now. I'm not planning on growing food. I spent a long time growing food until I became really good at it, and that's when I realized it's a fool's game. I didn't like doing it, and I wasn't very good at it. I became good enough to grow enough food for me and several other people year round and preserve the food, so on. But I didn't enjoy it. Life is too short for that. Welcome, Mimi Gurman, to membership in the Nature Bats Last YouTube channel. Thanks for joining. Thank you for finding the article, Pauline. I assume that's the Scientific Reports one by Strona and Bradshaw. You can just yell at me. I can hear you next door. No, that's not the one. Okay, well, what is it? Jeff asks, what do you recommend telling people when dealing with the grief induced by the information enclosed in our extinction once they realize it's for real? Well, sorry, Pauline, I'm not in a position to respond to that. Jeff, what do you recommend telling people? Tell them to go to guymcpherson.com and that it's my fault, not yours. And will there be grief? Yes. Oh, you might start by asking them the question I sometimes begin my presentations with. If you know that there is an asteroid, if we know, generally, if the scientific community knows that there's going to be an asteroid that strikes the Earth and we know exactly when and where it's going to hit, do you want to know? Do you as an individual want to know? Because that asteroid will certainly destroy habitat for humans, and shortly thereafter all humans will be dead. Do you want to know? I think that's a reasonable question. Most people understand the consequences of that asteroid or meteor or whatever you want to call the thing, and they know that they will soon going to be dead. That's the question that you really are asking them. So I think that's a reasonable approach. Pakistan that had 122 degrees a few years back. When I was living in Tucson, it hit 122 in Phoenix. It has subsequently passed that number a few times. All right. We've been going an hour and 10 minutes. I think it's about time to wrap. Have you seen a snowstorm in Spain that's causing trees to collapse from the pressure of the snow, blocking roads and generally causing chaos, as Spain has never seen such a snowfall? Actually, somebody who lives there sent me pictures and pointed out that it's kind of a mess. So I've seen the pictures. I've received a first-hand account. That's really inconvenient. And we can anticipate more of that. After all, a warmer planet is a wetter planet. With mass deglaciation changes in land and ocean pressures, would this trigger changes in plate tectonics? Possibility of changes in magma flow and earthquakes? Yes, as I pointed out repeatedly in this space. Yes, definitely yes. Because you make one continental plate lighter because a bunch of the water as ice melts and then runs off and goes to say, so this is the North American plate, this is the Pacific plate. It's always there's always a lot of tension there to begin with. Witness the San Andreas Fault. This one loses a bunch of water. This one gains a bunch of water as a result of ice melting. This goes up, this goes down. What happens there at the boundary? The ring of fire. That's what happens. Have you seen the U.S. drought monitor recently in the Southwest? It's as bad as I've ever seen it. Yes, I've seen numbers from the Southwest. I lived there for quite a long time, and it's really, really, really bad. People are comparing it to the historical record, going back as far as the historical record goes, and in some cases it's worse. So, yes, it's bad. Do you recommend any form of activism/conservativist action to protect ecosystems and wildlife for as long as possible? Yes. I recommend people do what they love. I recommend that we work really hard to save as much of the living planet as we can. I've been recommending that for, my whole life. So yes, I continue to recommend that. I'm doing things, I'm living differently than I did when I was on campus, of course. Much of that is driven by my monetary situation. Much of it is driven by my knowledge, which has increased profoundly since I was on campus. But do what you love. Do it well. I've said it thousands of times. I will continue to say it. Yes, quoting the Strona and Bradshaw paper is a good thread kill in a discussion about climate change. It certainly is. Jimmy John asked Bill Gates, and we're really, really close to the end here. Bill Gates has recently stated that he is interested in implementing geoengineering on a massive scale. Do you believe geoengineering could potentially buy us some time, despite it being untested? Well, actually, the version of geoengineering he's interested in, spraying the sky and funding David Keith to do that, is a really, really bad idea, debunked repeatedly, and most notably in summer of 2015 by the United States National Academy of Sciences, and also by a European body of similar stature at about that same time. So that's a bad idea. Spraying the skies? No, terrible, horrible, expensive, short-term, short-lived impact, crappy idea. You could spend way less money and do something that might work. That's where the Mears Reflection Project comes in. Type it into your URL. Mears, M-E-E-R-S. No, Mear, M-E-E-R. Mear Reflection, just like it sounds. MearReflection.com. That's the one to support. That's the only one that I think has a snowball's chance in hell of doing anything for us. And this will only allow us a relatively small window in which we will have to rearrange our social arrangements to begin with. This is not a magic bullet. This is not going to save us indefinitely. We're going to have to change the way we live quite profoundly. This gives us, the Mere Reflection Project gives us an opportunity to do that. It's the one. It can't get any traction at all. All right. I'm going to answer one more question, then I'm going to wrap. Pauline? Okay. Jimmy John, could we possibly survive for longer by actually continuing to burn fossil fuels in order to maintain the aerosol masking effect? Would this buy us any time, even if it were only a few years at most? Relative to stopping burning fossil fuels, yes, it would buy us some time. But there are other threats. Please go to the journal article, the most recent one I wrote, that has to do with habitat. It's found approximately halfway through every recent blog post. It has to do with habitat. It's the only peer-reviewed article you'll see on there that has to do with habitat. So just go there, read the paper. There's lots of different ways that we can drive ourselves to extinction. And apparently we're shooting for every single one of them. So I'm going to track down the name of that paper right now. It is not there. It's called Near-Term Loss of Habitat for Homo sapiens. It's a PDF. It's in Earth and Environmental Science Research and Reviews. And were I able, I would draw attention to it in the chat box of this thing. See if I can do that. No, that didn't do it. Sorry. Okay, gonna wrap this up now. And you can find that many places at Nature Bats Last. Many places at Nature Bats Last. So just take a look. And I just told you the full title and everything else about it. So it shouldn't be that difficult to find. And that's a wrap. Thank you everybody for joining in. We will try to do this again in another week or 10 days or so. And I look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks very much.